welcome to chapter 6. This is distribution of materials. We're talking about plants now. This is the fourth and final part of chapter 6. We've been looking at the circulatory system, the urinary system, as well as the respiratory system, and this is the final one here. So when we look at transport in plants, transport in plants happens with vascular tissue, which is made up of something called xylem and phloem. Now, this is the picture of the xylem over here, and this is the phloem, and they are structured a little bit differently. If you notice, the xylem only really transports mainly water, okay, and dissolved minerals, macronutrients, which are like large nutrients, and nutrients needed in large amounts, and micronutrients. So, but mainly water. The phloem transports sucrose to other regions of the plant. So sucrose is what the plant makes is usable energy. So after cellular respiration, okay, you get a sugar in the form of sucrose, okay, as well as other hormones and other organic plant material. So here you go. Here, this is the phloem, and all these sugars can be made up in these leaves, because these leaves here are all photosynthesizing. Now these roots, however, they aren't exposed to any light, so they can't photosynthesize or provide energy for themselves. So sugars will transport down the phloem, okay, towards these roots. Now again, these roots here, they need to be transporting water up the xylem towards the leaves, because they can't really get their own water source. Yeah, and we'll look at in detail of the xylem and the phloem. So, how water moves in vascular tissue. Water is absorbed by root hairs into the xylem, just over here, and it moves up via air pressure and active transport. So the plant is using energy to push the water up there. Water is pulled up the xylem via a chain of reactions of vessels losing water to the environment. So as water is lost to the environment over here, you know how water is kind of like sticky, or it's almost like it's got a bit of polarity in it? As the water is pulled off the leaves, it gets pulled up by those through the tiny xylem vessels as well. Now, how organic substances move through vascular tissue. So have a look at this picture here, and you'll notice again, you've got the xylem on this side and the phloem on this side here. So soluble organic substances are transported by phloem tissue. Okay, so we're looking at again sucrose, or micronutrients. Sucrose and hormones, and they're synthesized at the leaves, and I move to parts of the plant for storage. And the movement of organic material through a plant is called translocation, which is over here. So you've got the phloem, okay, you've got the synthesizing cell, the sugars are going down the storage cells, okay, and it can either be kept for storage or used for metabolism. And the xylem, on the other hand, is where water is being pulled up along there. Now, photosynthesizing leaves produce sugars, and sugars are actively transported mainly as a sucrose from leaves to other plants to the plant, where it's either stored as starch or broken down into monosaccharides to be used for metabolism. So a plant creates its own food, and it uses that own food to actually have metabolism, so energy. These are modified, so the sieve tubes, let's have a look here. This is a sieve tube, and that's where metabolism occurs. And these are modified plant cells that act like straws. Okay, so the energy required for active transport is provided by the companion cells. So these sieve tubes, okay, metabolism is occurring here, energy is being produced, okay, and it's also being produced in the companion cells. Okay, so by having energy in the companion cells that helps push this down and helps move the water up as well. So as the concentration of sugar in xylem of the phloem increases, water moves from the xylem by osmosis into the sieve tubes in that region. Okay, so as you increase lots of sugar in the sieve tubes here, water will move from this way by osmosis. Okay, and it's under a lot of pressure. Now, parts of the plant that use organic material that's made elsewhere are called sinks. Okay, so a root cell would be a sink because it's using organic material that's made elsewhere in the plant from the leaves. When sugar leaves phloem to enter a sink, the effect is to increase the concentration of water in the sieve tube in that region, so water moves out of the sieve tube. The loss of water from the sieve tube close to the sink results in a decreased pressure in the sieve tubes in that region. So what's happening is, if you look at the sieve tube again here, okay, so the whole idea of sugar leaving the phloem to enter a sink, the effect is actually increasing the water in the sieve tubes here. Okay, so the more sugar you have in these sieve tubes, the more water is going to pass through here. Then, as you use the sugars as they enter the sink down here, like the roots, etc., the water goes back out to the xylem, and there's low pressure down here now. So that results in low pressure in the sieve tubes in that region. In summary, a region of higher pressure exists in sieve tubes near the source of the sugar. So this is near the source of the sugar, okay, higher up. And a region of low pressure exists near the sugar sink. Okay, so all the leaves up here, high pressure exists here, and over here where the roots are, low pressure. The difference in pressure pushes the sugar-rich sap through the sieve tubes. Okay, so it pushes it right down. So high pressure and low pressure, and it pushes all the sugars down to where it's needed. When the sugar arrives at its sink, it is used in different ways. So it's either stored as starch, it uses subunits for building structural components, or uses an energy source for cellular respiration. Now, when it comes to gas exchange in leaves, we know that it's happens by stomata. And let's have a look at your diagram here. Okay, so this is when the stomata is open with A here, that's when it's open, and this is B where it's closed. Now, leaves contain many pores known as stomata, or also known as stoma if they're singular. Each stoma is surrounded by two guard cells. Okay, and this might be a recap for you guys. The stoma opens and closes depending on the turgor, or like kind of the fatness or the thickness of the guard cells. If there's high water content, it becomes turgid and the pore is open. So think about it, this is the stomata, okay, and when it's high water content, it kind of inflates with water. It goes, okay, fill that with water, and now it's open. If there's low water content, the guard cells become flaccid and the pore closes. So, okay, so increase in water, it like fills up, and then when it loses water, it closes down. And the amount of water in the guard cell depends on the potassium ions inside the guard cells. So what happens, right, is, let's go back here, just to explain it in terms of potassium ions. Just like with diffusion, it goes from a concentration of high to low, okay? So by putting potassium ions into the guard cell, it forces water to go in, because outside there's heaps of water, but inside the guard cells it's become more salty because of the potassium ions that's been actively transported in. So water starts to fill up. But if the plant wants to close the guard cells, it moves the potassium outside of the guard cells. Therefore, it becomes more kind of salty outside of the guard cells. Therefore, water wants to dilute it, and water will go from an area of high concentration to low, which so that it starts to close it again. There are some structural features of guard cells. Number one, the wall adjacent to the pore. Okay, so it's thicker than the wall away from the pore. That allows it to kind of open and close in that way, so if it fills up, it actually splits open. Also, there are something called microfibrils in the guard cells to make the inner wall less elastic to the outer wall. What this means is, in general, there are just structural features which help guard cells. One which is thicker pores and microfibrils inside the guard cells. Now you can also do gas exchange in stems, and they're called lenticels. So outer layers of stems which are usually woody or corky, which do not allow a gas exchange via diffusion. So you can't really have diffusion via woody or corky surfaces. So they need to obtain their oxygen via openings called lenticels. Lenticels develop when parenchyma cells, below the buccal cork reproduce and erupt through the outer layers of the cell. So these are parenchyma cells here, and it's when this cork kind of cell, so imagine if you think of a tree, okay, it's got that cork or bark kind of that woody outer layer, and you can't really diffuse through that, so therefore these cork reproduce and then erupts, makes a bit of a hole. So oxygen is able to diffuse into these loosely packed parenchyma cells, and carbon dioxide diffuse out. So gas can travel in and out of here because of the parenchyma cells are loose, and it's opened up a lenticel, which is an opening. Lenticels can't open like a stomata, it just stays open. So if you look at your apple here, that little black dot there, see that there? That is actually a lenticel. So when you eat your apple, have a look and see if you can see these dots there. These are actually all lenticels, which allow diffusion of gases. Now if you're in the root system, living cells and roots also require oxygen for respiration. So the outer surfaces of the root hairs are kept moist by water in the soil, and sometimes when you've got this soil, sometimes if it's porous enough, or if it's got enough kind of if it's a bit grainy, you can have air actually fill the small cavities. So that's why when you do gardening, you don't want to pack the soil down too much. If you pack it and it becomes too squashed, then there's no air and it becomes too and the roots can't just have any gas exchange. That's why when you plant plants for the garden, etc., you want to kind of dig a fork through and let it air and let it just gently drop down, and so there's lots of air through there. It also allows water to flow through the whole system. So oxygen diffuses into root hairs and carbon dioxide diffuses out. And if you can see, these are all the air spaces here, the white things in between the rocks. Now with plants, they also need to do excretion as well. So plants have a high tolerance of waste, which can easily be stored. In plants, the term agastic substance is used instead of excretory products. So if I was talking about waste in plants, you'd use the term agastic substance. So these substances include stored food materials such as starch grains and other cell inclusions, insoluble compounds like sometimes you get some nitrogen if it's not being used, and waste products. CO2 can be used in photosynthesis, so that's not really technically a waste product. So excretory products such as resins, okay, which is like colors, and oils accumulate in the vacuoles and sometimes in cell walls. They may be stored in a solution or in crystals to form Waste may be stored in solution or in a crystal form in vacuoles. For example, spinach stores oxalic acid crystals in the vacuole of the leaves. Waste can also easily be lost when leaves are dropped as well. So when it's if a tree is kind of having too much waste, they'll just put all the waste into that one leaf and then drop the leaf, and then you've got rid of that agassic substance. Now, comparing plants with mammals, in general, we've looked at excretion, respiration, and transport of nutrients in plants, and we've also looked at it with mammals. Let's have a comparison between them both. So mammals require blood and a heart to pump the fluid around, whereas plants lack any type of organ to pump. They don't really have, they don't have that kind of system at all. Mammals have pigmented cells called hemoglobin, which carries oxygen. This carries more oxygen compared to just oxygen in solution, giving the ability for animals to have oxygen-rich blood to cater for high energy needs of cells. So hemoglobin allows you to carry more oxygen compared to just oxygen and water. Okay, and that means that if you've got high oxygen in your hemoglobin, you can sustain high energy needs of cells. Plants have oxygen needs met via diffusion, so they don't need a lung at all to breathe in and out. They just diffuse. They just allow gaseous exchange through diffusion. And in general, plants have low energy needs anyway, because they're not really running around, they're not competing, etc. They're not fighting with each other, so they've got low energy needs. Mammals take in high amounts of food for energy and produce waste which needs to be eliminated, whereas plants produce their own energy and can utilize some of the waste for parts of the plant or even be stored away for a long time. So that concludes the end of chapter 6, okay? So right now you should be doing your quick check questions and your glossary, and also fill out any of the notes in the booklet. I'll give you a quick quiz as well coming up soon. Remember, you've got your SAC next week, so hopefully you'll be in preparation for that. Alright guys, have a great weekend as well, and all the best. Thank you.